Hello students, I'm Baldish Kapula, and in this presentation of mine, we are going to discuss about various literary devices that are used in literature. We will also discuss when are they referred to as literary devices and when do we call them as poetic devices. The information related to various literary devices has been taken from internet and various educational blogs. Okay, now in this slide, we are going to discuss what are the literary devices. They are the tools or the techniques which the writers or the poets use to increase or enhance the emphasis or clarity of their write-ups. Basically, students, these devices or techniques or tools are used to either beautify, make it more pleasant, make it more presentable, and make it more interesting. Basically, we can say that these devices are basically used by the writers or the poets to make the writer more interesting and more connected. Okay, now in this slide, we are going to discuss the uses of poetic devices. But before we proceed to discuss the uses of poetic devices, let's make the things clear or the difference between literary devices and poetic devices. Students, the literary devices, when they are used in poem to intensify an emotion, add rhythm, or make a poem more meaningful, they are called as poetic devices. In simple words, if I say the literary devices, when they are used by the poets in the poem, they are called as poetic devices. Okay, so as I already mentioned, they are basically used in the poem. What? The literary devices, okay, the various literary devices to add rhythm and tone to the poem by rhymic words, using sounds, etc., to enhance the imagery in the poem by using metaphors, natural imagery, etc., to improve and intensify a certain feeling in the poem by personification, irony, to make a poem more meaningful with word play. Examples are similes, metaphors, allusions, to add structure to the poem, like with stanza, ballet, sonnet, etc. Students, there are n number of literary devices which are used by authors in our literature. Okay, but keeping in mind our syllabus for class 10 as prescribed by CBSE and the poems which are given in our main course book, that is First Flight, these are the list of common poetic devices which are used in the poem in this book, that is your First Flight. Okay, very commonly used poetic devices are repetition, alliteration, assonance, consonance, onomatopoeia, euphony, cacophony, rhyme, rhythm, anaphora, epistrophe, imagery, symbolism, personification, simile, metaphor, metonymy, apostrophe, oxymoron, paradox, irony, enchantment, transferred epithet, and hyperbole. For your knowledge or for extra knowledge, I have given many other poetic devices also in this presentation. But if you ask me, as far as CBSE curriculum and syllabus is concerned, so this slide shows just the important or the very common poetic devices that are used in the poems which are given in your main course. Students, the major form of poetic devices are based on to add sounds of words, to enhance the meaning of words, to arrange the words in certain order or sequence, and to create imagery through words. Many of the writers and linguists have categorize these poetic devices or literary devices into various other forms also, but this is the basic categorizations of the various poetic devices that we use. In this slide, students, we are going to discuss about the poetic devices that are used to create rhythm and sound. The first one mentioned in the slide is onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia are those words which are spelled the same as they sound. Basically, they are the words of sound. Examples already given: splash, murmur, bang, meow. This word is given in the poem The Tale of Cuss the Dragon in our first flight. The second poetic device which is given is alliteration. All of you are very well aware about this poetic device. Alliteration is a phonetic structure and repeated usage of sound or letter used in the first syllable of a word. And sometimes they form a very good tongue twisters. So the tongue twister is given to you. You can practice it. One more example I can give you. The one which is coming to my mind is a fair farm furrow. So the first sound is repeated. So this is an example of alliteration. The third example given over here is rhyme. It is a very important poetic device, widely used while framing poems. They play a decisive role in adding more charm and mood in the poem. Okay, examples are night, bright, skin, grin, frog, log, etc. This is very common. Rhyme and rhythm. Okay, so we always give you the question: name the rhymic words. What is the rhyme of the poem? Like A B A B B C C. So this is all the example of rhyme. Okay. Now next, which is given in this slide, is assonance. So before we go to assonance and the consonant, students, let me tell you one very basic concept for English. English is a language which has only one alphabet and 26 letters. I repeat, because a basic mistake which if you ask anyone about this, they'll give you an answer that English has 26 alphabets. No, very much wrong. English has only one alphabet and 26 letters. These 26 letters are further divided into 5 vowels, that is A, E, I, O, U, and the remaining 21, that is 26 minus 5 comes out to be 21. These 21 letters are called as consonants. Now coming back to the fourth point of the slide, that is assonance. Nothing but when the assonance or the vowel sound is repeated, they are called as assonance. So you can see the example, the crumbling thunder of seas. So the U sound. Okay, there are many more examples also. If you see the poems which are mentioned in first slide, you will get lots and lots of examples of assonance as well as consonants. As I had discussed in the previous slide about vowels and consonants. So we had done assonance, which is nothing but the repetition of vowel sounds. Okay. So now what is consonance then? Consonance is when the sound of the remaining 21 letters are found repeating. We call them as consonants, or we categorize them as consonants. Example, you see, toss the glass, pause. Dawn goes down. Okay. Here the vowel sounds are not repeated, but the consonants are repeated, or the sound of the consonants are repeated. Hence we call them as consonants. The next poetic device is anaphora. Now what is anaphora? Anaphora is the act of beginning a series of successive sentences or clauses, that is sentence fragments. Don't get confused, okay? With the same word or phrase. It is an older literary device that many writers instinctively still use today. Okay. The best example which I can quote over here is the ball poem by John Berryman, which is given in the first flight. That's the main course reader. You see, what is the boy now who has lost his ball? The second sentence again, what is he to do? I saw it go. You see this sound, this word what is repeated in the first and the next sentence. So the first word, when it is repeated, first word or phrase, when it is repeated in the first and the second line, we call it as anaphora. Okay. The reverse of anaphora is apostrophe, which is the next topic in our slide, in this current slide, which is epistrophe. Okay. Unlike to anaphora, if the word is repeated in the successive sentences in the end part, that we call it as apostrophe. Common word, if you ask my students, I'll say apostrophe is just the reverse of anaphora. Example, you see, last week he was just fine. Yesterday he was fine. You see this fine word which is repeated. And then you see the next is and today he was fine. I repeat once again. Last week he was just fine. Yesterday he was fine. And today he was just fine. The fine word is repeated in the end of each sentence. This is an example of anaphora. Further, I got a very good example of anaphora, as well as I got an example of apostrophe over here. So you see, this is a very famous poem, stanza from Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So and sleep and sleep. So here in this, we have anaphora, we have epistrophe, then we have rhythm, we have rhymic words, we have rhymic scheme. So these are the poetic devices which I further in continuation to the poetic devices to create rhythm and sound. In this slide, we are talking about enjambment. Enjambment is from Middle French word meaning to step over, is a poetic device in which a thought or an idea in the poem carries over from one line to another without a pause. Basically, we are not using any punctuation, comma, semicolon, colon. The poet, instead of ending his lines on a comma, where we would normally think to pause in our speech, he includes the verb in the line before moving to the next. This gives a poem a very different rhythm and complexity than it otherwise would have had. Example, Fog by Carl Sandburg, Dust of Snow, Fire and Ice by Robert Frost. These are the best examples for enchantment. Next example, or the next poetic device in this slide is euphony. I'm sorry, it's not example. The next poetic device is euphony. Euphony is the repetitive use of melodic tones that are enjoyable to read or listen, to soft consonant sounds like M, N, W, R, and F, as well as consonants that vibrate, such as S, that is sh, sir, sh, and th, okay, th, are used to create this. Example is given to you for your reference. So in this slide, we are talking about repetition and cacophony, okay. So repetition is just a repetition of words. Through such poetic device in English, the words or the phrases are repeated in sentence. It is used in poetry as well as in the prose sections. Okay, the Ball poem by John Berryman. What is he to do? So this you see in this line, what word is being repeated? In the next line, you see balls, and balls again 2 times balls is given. Will be lost always, little boy. These are the example of repetition. Now, what is cacophony then? Cacophony is nothing but the use. So in this slide, we are going to discuss about rhythm, illusion, irony. Rhythm. In rhythm, the flow of words throughout each meter and stanza creates rhythm and highlights particular element of the poem. Now then, what is illusion? By this term, we can understand it is a phrase or a word that is meant to call something without mentioning it clearly. Illusion, which is yet another popular used poetic device in English, is an ambiguous statement or phrase that leaves a reader in oblivion. Example is given to you. One example which is coming to my mind right now is the poem Amanda, which is again a poem mentioned in First Flight, the main course reader book prescribed by CBSE. Here also, when she says she wants to be a Rapunzel, okay, when she says I want to be Rapunzel, locked up in the tower above. So this being a Rapunzel on the part of Amanda is a illusion, okay. The next one which is given in this slide is irony. In the literary landscape, words are often framed in such a way that their original meaning gets changed. As a popular English poetic device, it is actually a figure of speech that helps us understand the difference between reality and appearance. That means in Hindi, if you say kathni or karni, mein farak. That is, what is said is not done. Okay, this is what is the meaning of irony. In this slide, we are going to discuss about allegory. Allegory is a narrative or description in which certain abstractions or concepts are represented by certain events, behaviors, characters, locations, or objects. Okay, example is already given: the tortoise and the hare. There is Aesop fables. The next one is euphemism. Is the act of replacing a term that can offend or imply something unpleasant with one that is less hurtful or pleasing. These kind of phrases are known as euphemisms. In writing or speaking, euphemisms are frequently employed in place of harsher or more direct language. For example, the example already I've given from the net or various other books which I could find, the best example over here I can give is death. Some death is very harsh. So to represent death, we can use the word eternal sleep. Now, if I use the word eternal sleep, it also refers to death. Okay, just to make the things clear. The next one on the slide is ambiguity. Ambiguity happens when a statement structure or a substance leaves room for alternative interpretations and obscure its intended meaning. Okay, there are two meanings which are coming out from a phrase or a sentence or the words. So in this slide, we are going to discuss about personification, analogy, denotation. Personification, most of you are well aware about it. That is when we give human attributes to inanimate objects or plants or animals or any other living being other than human being. Okay, they are called as personification. So poems are full of personifications. So that is not a very big problem, and most of you must be knowing about it. So the next one is analogy. Nowadays, students, in our this paper, the question paper which is given by CBSE in a course, this is language, English language and literature, analogy comes a lot. So many students keep on asking, what is analogy? So let me make the things very clear. An analogy is a literary device that establishes a relationship between two concepts based on similarities or connections. Establishing this connection makes a new topic simpler to understand by introducing it through a relatable contrast. So this analogy has been coming for the past 2 years, and this year also it was there in your CBSE main exams. So many students get confused and they say, what is analogy? Analogy is nothing but you need to understand what is the relationship between the two concepts we are talking about. Once you're able to crack it, easily you will get the answer. The next poetic device which is given over here is denotation. The denotation of a term refers to its neutral, objective meaning. No matter the language or aspect of speech, every word that has a definition in a dictionary also has a denotation. Example is given to you. In this slide, students, we are going to discuss about three poetic devices. So the first one is cliche, very not very commonly used. All three of them, contrast, connotation, and cliche, not very frequently or commonly used, but still for your knowledge, I would like to discuss. Cliche is a scenario or term that is overused to the extent that it is deemed unoriginal, is referred to as cliche. So the word carries a bad reputation since sloppy writing is frequently connected with cliches. Connotation is a use of a word to imply a unique association from its denotative or literal meaning. Contrast. A writer will often use contrast as a rhetorical tactic to highlight the contrasts between two persons, places, or objects. The simplest definition of contrast is the antithesis of two things, highlighting and clarifying their differences. So examples are already given to you for your reference. Once again, I repeat, they are not very commonly used poetic devices. Yes, students. Now, this slide is important because we have two important poetic devices in this slide. The first one, apostrophe. The second one is metaphor, and the third one over here is simile, out of which metaphor and simile are very common and very confused ones also. Okay, not from my point of view, but from the student's point of view. Okay, let's first discuss what is apostrophe. It addresses the subject that is not present in the work. In this case, the object is absent or inanimate. Here are some examples of apostrophe. Okay, busy, old, fool, unruly son. Why dost thou thus through the windows and through curtains call on us? The next one is metaphor and simile. Both of them are the comparisons. They are the form of comparison, students. Okay. When you compare two things without using the words as or like, it is called as metaphor. When you compare two things and you use the word as or like, it is called as simile. So let me make the things very simple and clear. You see the first example which I've given over here. He was a lion in the battlefield. That means we are talking about the bravery of a person. We are comparing the bravery of a person with the lion, but we are not using the word as or like. Hence, it is a metaphor. Now, you see in the example for simile, the same example I have reframed it. He fought like an lion in the battlefield. He was as brave as a lion. I repeat, he fought like a lion in the battlefield. The second form is he was as brave as a lion. So in the first sentence, you see the word like is used. In the second sentence, the word as is used. This is a simile. The essence or the meaning is same. The bravery of a person is being compared with the lion. In the metaphor, we are not using the word as or like. In simile, we are using the word as or like. Okay. Now, usually the students get confused. Here, I'll just give you a tip from my side. It's my own tip, which will help you to remember which is simile and which is metaphor. If you closely look at the sentence, he fought like a lion, or okay, let me reframe it. My words. Look at the word simile, S-I-M-I-L-E. If I spell the word simile, sir sound, l sound is coming. Sir, S, l, L. Okay. Now you see the words as, it is A-S. So S is there for as, S. The S of as is the first letter of simile. Okay. Next you see another word like, L. L-I-K-E, L. Now this L is the second last letter of simile, L sound. So this sir and L sound of as and like are there in simile. So if you see a phrase, if you see a sentence where you find as and like directly, blindfoldedly, you can say it is a simile. Now you check in metaphor. In metaphor, neither we have S, neither we have L. That means as and like will not be there. So if as and like is not there, it is definitely metaphor. So this is one tip from my side so that you do not get confused. If you see in a sentence there is as and like, as I said, as has S, S is the first letter of simile. Like has L sound, that is the last sound of simile, L sound. Hence, it will be simile. Any sentence having as or like is simile. In metaphor, there is no S, there is no L sound. So hence, as and like is not there, it will be metaphor. Once again, to make the things very clear, metaphor is a comparison when you compare two things without using the words as or like, and simile is a comparison when you compare two things that are different from each other but having similar qualities but using the word as or like. So in this slide, we are going to discuss about pun, hyperbole, oxymoron, and paradox. Puns are among the most frequently used figures of speech in daily conversation. They may be a great conversation starters since they make you sound clever and occasionally even humorous, but not very commonly used in poems. Okay. So the next one is hyperbole, very frequently used. Hyperbole is nothing but an exaggeration or overspoken. When you speak too much about anything, that is called as hyperbole. Okay, hyper is over. Bol, you can relate it with Hindi word called bolna. So we can say that over bolna or too much. When you speak too much about anything, the best example I can relate or I can tell you is the tale of Kasur the dragon in our syllabus. That is your first flight is given, in which there is a stanza in which the poet is talking about Belinda is as brave as barrel full of bears. Ink and blink could chase lions down the stairs. Mustard is as ferocious as a tiger in rage. Okay, but Custard always cries for his nice safe cage, corner of the cage. So this, when we are talking too much about anyone, that is called as hyper. So next is oxymoron. This figure of speech, which should not be confused with ironies, okay, this is very important, and paradoxes, links two opposite ideas at once. This indicates that two opposite concepts are utilized inside a single sentence to create levity in an oxymoron figure of speech. Example, feather of lead. You know, lead is very heavy metal, okay? Now, feather is a very soft and heavy. Bright smoke. Smoke is usually black in color, gray black, bright smoke. Cold fire. How can a fire be cold? Okay. Quiet rage, which we have a tiger in the zoo, which is quite rage. Okay. So these are the examples of oxymoron. Now, what is paradox then? This figure of speech, like ironies, emphasizes something by discussing the exact opposite of it. Paradox is basically a phrase, a sentence, two different ideas or two contrasting ideas or links or concepts when they're spoken about, not sorry, they're spoken about in a sentence, we call it as paradox. Okay, a paradox on the other hand differs from the irony in that it does not make the contrast as evident to be natural in such a very difficult pose to keep up. So in this slide, we'll be talking about metonymy, synecdoche, and symbolism. Not very commonly used as far as a CBSE curriculum for class 10 is concerned, but you should know about them. Metonymy is similar to metaphor. This is a poetic device which uses an image or idea to stand in place of something. Okay, for example, if I say the White House is in discussion, that means I'm referring to the officials of White House, not the constructed White House. Okay. Second example, a mother tongue is a native language. Third, the press is in action. The press, we are referring to the journalist. Okay. Next poetic device is synecdoche. This is also somewhat similar to metonymy in that it takes a small part of something to represent something bigger. But rather than looking at something symbolically representative of a whole, synecdoche is a poetic device that looks at a physical part of that whole. Example, give me a hand, for instance, means give me assistance, help, which may or may not actually mean that give me your help. Okay. So another example which is given over here in this is New York is up against Chicago. That means the people of New York, they are against the people of Chicago. Okay. The third poetic device which is given in this slide is symbolism. Poet employs symbolism to communicate underlying ideas. There are several levels of meaning associated with symbols, including places, things, and actions. The literal meaning of the poem is deepened by symbolism. Okay, here we use the first poem which is there in a first flight, The Dust of Snow. Okay, so here we use symbolism. There are many other poems where we use symbolism for better understanding. In this slide, we are going to talk about rhymic scheme or rhyme scheme, also it is called. The sequence of sound that repeats at the conclusion of a line or stanza is known as rhyme scheme or rhymic scheme. Line by line, stanza by stanza, or throughout the entire poem, rhyme schemes might alter. If a poem will have a rhymic scheme or rhyme scheme, it will definitely have rhymic words. All English teachers will tell you to mark it as A, B, B, or AB, ABC kind of thing and all, okay? That is what is called as rhymic scheme. The next is stanza. Stanza is nothing but grouping of the lines and getting it separated from the next one. Basically, it is paraphrasing of the poem. The third one, which is given on this slide, is kenning. A two-word sentence that uses metaphors to describe an item is known as kenning. A riddle made up of a few lines of kennings that describe someone or something in perplexing detail is known as a kenning poem. It is sometimes referred to as compressed metaphor, which refers to meanings expressed in the limited number of words. Example is given to you, students. The next one is verse line. Right, it's a writing technique. Writing technique, single line poetry is referred to as verse. A stanza or other poetic components may also be mentioned while using this phrase. In this slide, students, we will be discussing about blank verse and free verse, snippet, ballad, epitaph, and haiku. Blank verse is written in strict iambic pentameter but has no rhyme scheme, and free verse contains no rhyme and no meter. The difference between blank verse and free verse I've already given. You can just go through this for your knowledge sake. The next one is snippet, nothing but a brief segment of writing or anything. Ballad is a type of narrative poem written in a sequence of 4-line stanzas as a literary device. It is one of the oldest poetic form in English. They are basically long poems that are written, can be sung, can be enacted on stage. Epitaph is described as an inscription or written remembrance of a person on a gravestone or in a work of literature. The last is haiku. Japanese poetry, known as haiku, is composed of only a few brief unrhymed lines. These lines can be expressed in a variety of short poems. The most typical haiku structure, however, consists of 3 lines of 5, 7, and 5 syllable each. A haiku poetry often focuses on a single intense feeling or picture. The example is given on page 19 of supplementary reader, that is the footprints without feet. In this slide, students, we are going to discuss few more poetry devices for arranging the words and stanzas. The first one given over here is limerick. Limerick is a common kind of quick, funny poem that is usually inappropriate and nonsensical. It is composed of 5 lines that rhyme with each other in the pattern A, A, B, B, A. The primary meter is anapaestic with 2 metrical feet in the third and fourth lines and 3 feet in the other lines. The example is given to you. Ode, all of you are very much aware about it. Ode is a brief lyrical poetry that frequently praises something. In praise of something, when poem is written, that is referred to as ode. Next is rondeau. The rondeau, so named because it uses the term round in French, is distinguished by its 2 rhyme sounds and retriment or refrain which repeats throughout. Next is sestina, a poem composed in a highly particular intricate form is called a sestina. The poem is in the French sestina style with 6 stanzas of 6 lines each and a final triplet of 3 lines. Triolet, the first line of a triolet is repeated as the 4th and 7th lines, while the second line is repeated as the 8th line. Triolet has just 2 rhymes. The last one is villanelle. The first and third lines of the first stanza are repeated alternatively in the subsequent stanzas of this French poetic form, which has 5 3-line stanza and a concluding quatrain. So students, this brings to the last slide on the various literary and the poetic devices. The first one given over here is synthesia, which is very much similar to simile. Synthesia is a figure of speech in which terminology from one sense is used to describe another, very much similar to simile. So the example itself makes the things very clear. The next one is imagery. In a literary or poetic context, imagery refers to authors' use of vivid language and description to enhance the reader's comprehension of the work by appealing to their senses. The last one we are talking about the tone or the mood, whether it is happy, sad, melancholy, whether it is satirical, whether it is what kind of mood is the poet or the writer wanting or radiating to the readers. Okay, so in this presentation, I have tried to sum up few very common poetic devices which are used in various poems as prescribed by CBSE in our syllabus or which is given in our main course book, that is First Flight. Few less common but frequently used ones for your knowledge. I hope you'll be liking the presentation. Thank you so much, students. And it's a humble request to all of you. Please do like, share, and subscribe to my channel so that I'm encouraged more to make such presentation for the benefit of the students. Thank you. Thank you, students. Thank you all. God bless you all.